over the crowd. So my name is Don Graves. I'm the president of the Gila Native Plant Society. Welcome. What a great turnout. We're so glad that you're here to celebrate Richard's life. Okay? So I figure that we have two very important things to do today. Number one is to celebrate Richard's life, and the second thing is to eat, right? Okay, so without further ado, I would like to introduce Ilka Snyder. You all know her, I'm assuming, Richard's wife. And she has a few things that she'd like to say, and then we're going to pass the baton over to Ann Headley.
Thank you, Don. Thank you all for being here today. Oh, I'm pretty loud.
Yeah, not loud.
Yeah.
No, there you go.
Okay, thank you all for being here today to celebrate Richard's amazing life. And I'm going to read this, which I usually don't do, but just to be on the safe side. So, Richard and I first met 28 years ago when Richard was giving a poetry reading at Biosphere 2, where I was working at the time. All right. Between the poetry reading and us sharing our lives, there was an interesting few months of inching closer and closer, sort of an awkward courtship dance. I learned that Richard became a botanist at the age of 8 after having been a marine biologist, and that he raised alligators in his mother's bathtub as a kid, and many other stories. He learned that I had run away with a traveling circus at the age of 18, before settling down in the Southwest to study animal science and education. I had moved from Biosphere 2 to the Tortolita Mountains with all my menagerie, including a pair of emus. An egg is to be found on the memory table. A mutual friend of ours brought Richard out to my little farm, and we were sitting in silence to witness an emu chick hatch, and we found other excuses to spend time together, such as dinners, hiking, camping, and field trips. Richard invited me to his 60th birthday party. He told me 39, like he did every year, and which I sadly missed because I was in Canada at a rare breeds meeting at the time. So we had our own birthday party, just Richard and me. The following summer, Richard visited me in Western Australia, where I was working at the time. And when you look at the slides, there are several slides from our trip to Australia. I was working on a ranch, and he met me there, and we traveled in the outback, the Kimberleys. So, now I'm going to say it again. We traveled the outback and had the most wonderful adventures, conversations, and despite our very different backgrounds, we always shared deep common values. A year after we met, we moved to our beautiful new place in the Catalina Mountains, and we were in awe about sharing our lives with all the plants and animals that came with us to our new home. Okay, the next line. Okay, I don't know why I'm writing things that will make me cry, but I'm going to make it. We have been best friends, husband and wife, and soulmates for over 27 years. We went on many field trips together, mostly in Mexico. And Richard accompanied me on some of my endurance horse rides that I did in those days. And we were both amazed and enchanted by each other's so different worlds. I had no idea it could take hours to explore a short trail in the mountains and deserts, and all the plants and treasures that could be found. Richard Richard could not believe that us horse riders would trot at a fast pace over all those amazing treasures. Attending plant meetings and attending horse meetings was equally amusing and broadened our fascination with our worlds so different yet so much the same. In 2007, Richard and I moved to Silver City, just minutes from right here over the hill. And we completely and totally fell in love with our quiet home, well, except the roosters, dogs, horses, coyotes, bobcats, birds, etc. Hiking and riding right out the door, Richard being able to do his work without noisy air conditioners with a fresh breeze. Richard had the amazing gift of getting the younger generation interested in the natural world. Many of you were his students, colleagues, and friends. We're all looking forward to hearing some stories from you. Okay, now the last one I wrote it, and it probably makes me cry, so why do I write these things? I don't know. But Richard climbed the highest mountains, hiked in the hottest deserts, and dived in the deepest oceans. See, I told you. To find just that little plant, or piece of the puzzle, thank you, to complete one of his many papers and books. There's samples of his work back there, and you're welcome to look at them. We must all continue to find the puzzle pieces to contribute to our biosphere and to help the healing. Richard's legacy will live on forever. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Zilka. So on with the program. One of Richard's oldest friends has come as far from Boston to travel here, and he, as you will hear, has traveled the world, like Zilka, with Richard. James Aronson.
It's a thrill for me to be here. Up closer, thank you. Cool. Oh, that's good. Up like that. Okay, yes. I want to thank also Laurie Monti and Gary Nabhan, who contacted me and said, this ceremony is taking place in Silver City. James, you ought to be there. And it was a hike, but I said, it's true, I've got to be there, and I'm so keen and thrilled to meet all of you. So my relationship with Richard was always peripatetic. We traveled together plant hunting on several different continents, including the Rajasthan Thar Desert and the Atacama Desert in Chile, and the little very arid tip of Venezuela near the Guajira Peninsula, in Egypt, in Israel, in Mexico. And every time there were fascinating stories I don't have time to go into, but I always learned, and I was always moved by several things in Richard. I'm a much younger man than he was, so when we were traveling together, that was the case as well. His capacity as a natural historian that most of you probably experienced with him on walks, his capacity to teach, as Silke was saying, he was so generous with his knowledge, which reminds me of a guy that I worked with in Peru separately, Al Gentry, a name that we know to some of you, who was a very difficult guy to work with, but absolutely generous. If he realized you had a sincere interest in plants, he would share everything he knew with you all day long. But Richard was also extremely in touch with animals, not just plants. And that's what made him, in some ways, the perfect natural historian. And I hadn't understood. At that time, I could walk right past an animal on a path and not look at it. And then indigenous peoples and interest in cultures, and particularly desert peoples around the world, and networking with people. I learned so much from him. And I don't want to go on very long, but just say that you've been with him in Australia, Silka. I never had a chance to do that. But I think I learned from Richard also the biogeographical scope to start with when studying desert plants or their relationships with people, and that is global. What's going on in all the world's deserts, and I've pursued that ever since. But I'll stop there, and I just wanted to say hello to all of you and thank you for organizing this wonderful event.
I'm looking. Gabe, where are you? Gonna come up, I think. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Gabriel Feldman, and my family, Chelsea and Emma and Milo. And, excuse me. Yeah, just start by saying how thankful I am to have met Richard and all the things that he taught me and our family. And I first met Richard, actually I found him online. I've always been interested in just native edible plants, and was searching online that there's this amazing man, Richard Felger, who worked with grasses, mesquite, all sorts of natives, and I found he lived in Silver City, of all places, and I couldn't believe it. I thought, oh my gosh, I gotta meet Richard. So I immediately sent him an email, and we met. He said, come to the market, and we met, and he started mentoring me. He started, and Chelsea too, he started teaching us, and just what a wealth of information Richard was. And he took time every week. We would meet at the college, and he would help me with my scientific names of the plants. Very good at that, Richard was. And Silka accepted us into their house too, and we'd come and visit his greenhouse. And yeah, I miss Richard a lot, and feel him here today, and yeah, just thankful for all his teachings, and what a good man he was, and gentle spirit, and yeah, I hope to carry on his what he taught me. I'm out in Mimbres and Lower Mimbres, and I have a nursery out there, and carrying on growing, the Apache redgrass, Panicum bulbosum, and the Saccatone, and other natives. And so Chelsea and I are still carrying that on, and if anyone's interested, just let me know, and I can, you can come out to our place and get those grasses. So yeah, thank you, Richard. I love you.
There's a man named Carlitos here who has a very short story. Oh, Carlos, but Carlitos as well. Los dos. Ahí tenemos dos.
Lo siento mucho.
We're going to keep some of the stories fairly short. Don't feel afraid to speak briefly.
You got it. I got to know Richard when I was a field biologist at Organ Pipe Cactus for 30 plus years. And I didn't work with plants mostly, I worked with lizards and snakes and rodents and weather stations and stuff. But I still ran into Richard a lot. He was awesome. We all considered him to be the god, the true god of Sonoran Desert, botany. And I just wanted to say one time we were on a road trip together, and he had this funny habit of saying, "Stop the car, do it now." And he'd see something out the window at 60 miles an hour. It's like, "Stop the car, do it now." And he had a particular fascination with vacant lots that were full of weeds. And he was absolutely wonderful, and we were all very lucky to know him. Thank you.
Here is Gary Nabhan. Give you a minute to come up here. Ben Wilder was one of Richard's young colleagues, and Gary has something to read from Ben.
Thank you, Anne. And thank you, Silke, for sharing with Richard the richest years of his life. We're just all grateful to you in a million different ways. Ben Wilder, doggone him, can't be with us today because of some stupid thing like a pregnancy of his wife. She may be due today. I just don't know where his priorities are, you know. But he immediately started to write this within a month of Richard going on a last field trip with him and telling Ben that he was passing. Ben has a wonderful father to begin with, Janos Wilder, but Richard was really like a second father. So these are field notes from Ben, which is, I think, an appropriate way to honor Richard. 6 November 2020, written in the dunes of the Gran Desierto, views of the Tinajas Altas Mountains through a pass in the Sierra del Rosario, obstructed by star dunes. The center of the universe, Richard said. Cool season clouds with moisture gently washing down on a brisk breeze from the southeast and getting brisker by the moment. On the early morning of October 31st, 2020, with a full moon, Richard left us. It happened suddenly. No time for many of us to make preparations, if one could ever prepare for such a thing. The last time we spoke was on the 21st of October, and he knew the end was near, even if I didn't. He told me, "No more changes in my manuscripts. Make sure they stay just as they are at this moment. They're done." To dedicate one of his great works, the forthcoming UMA Ethnobiology, he wanted to make sure that Silke Schneider's name was on it because she was the love of his life. And he said to me this twice in a brusque way, "It's curtains for me now, but it was a good run. It was a really good run." To have a memorial he would want to be at, he said, "No sniveling, no slobbing, no praising, no sympathy, and no feeling sorry for me." Got that, everyone? That's his orders. So we're having fun today. As we all know, Richard was not one for goodbyes, though I thought he would be with me forever. I'm lucky enough to have been invited by Richard into a small club, and you are all members of that club. It's a core group who knew how special Richard was and is, a truly unique, gentle, loving, perceptive, totally irreverent genius. Ornery, particular, impatient, meticulous, careful, diligent, focused, and an infinitely creative human. He gave those around him who really got to know him so many gifts, and many of those gifts are in your hearts. He taught me how to be a scientist, a writer, a field botanist, an ecologist, an interviewer, a grants getter, a friend, a teacher, an explorer. He taught me life and work are to be fun. purposeful and meaningful, but fun every moment or it's not worth it. He understood humans as a species over the long span of time. He had a perception of humanness that few hold. His gifts will last me my lifetime. As I write these words, Ben said, the sun is bursting out of the clouds, splashing light onto the dunes and the Sierra del Rosario. Gold light is pouring over the sand. The Sierra is luminously gold. A double rainbow arching fully over the Sierra del Rosario. Tears pouring down my face. I don't think I have to say goodbye to Richard, and in ways I know none of us have to. He's with us in our hearts.
Do I see Kathy Marlette somewhere? Would you be willing to come up or have the mic come to you? There you are, right in front of me.
I don't like microphones and I don't like big crowds, but here we go. I have the honor and the privilege of probably knowing Richard the longest here. I met him when I was about 11 years old, down in the house in Desemboki, where Richard did a lot of research with the Series. And I'm sure you've heard, I wish I'd known now, then what I know now, because I would have taken advantage of Richard's friendship and knowledge so much more. Probably the one story that's been passed around, maybe you haven't heard, was the first time he walked into the house in Desemboki, our little adobe house. He came in the front door and the first words to my mother was, "Where can I press my plants?" And that's true. My mother was a little bit nonplussed, but there began a great friendship and a great work together for the Surrey Ethnobotany. I was a often barefoot kid catching octopuses and eating fresh snails down at the beach. And Richard wasn't the warmest, probably with children, but he took me under his wing. I got to go on field trips with him and my mother, field trips to Tiburon Island with Ike Russell, flying over there, learning so much about science and biology, and that was the beginning of my interest in biology, I think, was because of Richard. Watching him cut up lizards at our kitchen table. And going on plant excursions. There's one thing, we were walking on down at Sargento Estuary. I think my mother was along, and he looked down. There was a cactus there. He looked down. He said, "I didn't see that," and walked on. It must not have been something he wanted to write. I don't know why he said that, but it was pretty funny. So there was that side of Richard. There are so many stories I could tell, but I won't. But what a privilege it was to know him, to have him in my life. And yeah, he was great. Thank you.
Carlitos has another anecdote.
Just a quick one. You know, the student newspaper at U of A is the Arizona Daily Wildcat, perfect size for plant pressing. And he said he went to the staff there one time and said, "You guys have the most perfect paper in the world. There's only one thing you could do to make it better. Don't print anything on it." That's all.
Where's Kelly Kincher?
Richard's such a character, you know. So I live in Kansas, but I have a place at Lake Roberts, and I've been down for about 20 years, and I was delighted when Richard and Silke moved to Silver City, because I knew Richard back in the 80s. I'm an ethnobotanist, and I used to go to still do the Economic Botany and Society for Ethnobiology conferences, and Richard would be at some, especially the ones in Tucson or Phoenix, and I was just delighted because he had done this work with the Seri, and he was like a mentor, but at a distance. But he was such a character. I remember at one of the conferences, he was out in the parking lot selling his Trees of the Sonora book because, well, you know, Richard always had a thing with publishers, and they never treated him right. And, you know, you could buy books and sell them, but he was still in the back of his car, just hawking books out of the back of his car. I had to buy one. And so when Richard moved here, I knew I wanted to work with him because, you know, he's such a brilliant mind and such a talented person. And we started working on things, and because of the Gila Symposium that put together, some of us were making an effort to present things, and Richard and I decided to present on the trees of the Gila. I had data from field work I'd done along the river. Rich and I both knew the trees. We wrote that up in this nice little paper. And then on Richard's initiative, he said, we had to expand that and turn that into a book. And so we talked about that, and Richard got this idea that we should just self-publish it because, you know, we could do that. And I said, Richard, I don't want to raise money for a book, and I don't want to pay for a book out of my own pocket. And Richard was always kind of like encouraging things to move forward and get you involved in stuff. And so I just kind of put my foot down with that. And so then we expanded the work and involved Jim Verrier and Javier and made the book bigger. Richard said, we should just send this to University of New Mexico Press. They'd want to publish it. And I was kind of doubtful. I said, well, it's a regional work, and, you know, Jack Carter has a good tree book out. But Richard sent it, and they said, yes, let's do it. So then it got to be tough because Richard was sick, and we were working to finish the book, and that book is Richard's. I mean, the major part of that work is his. Jim and I ended up finishing the last revisions and work, and then really sad, but changing the front part to put the dedication to Richard. So I'm delighted to dedicate that book to Richard, and I am so glad to have gotten to know him. He was such a character, so brilliant, so ornery, hard to work with, but a delight. Thank you.
Muffin, where are you? Muffin, there.
Thank you, Silke and Anne and all of you amazing people, friends of Richard's, for bringing us all together. And thank you, Richard, for making this happen. I had the wonderful privilege of being an almost office mate with Richard early on at the Desert Museum. He had a little cubby hole, and I had another cubby hole separated by a little kitchen in a converted stable, which was the research area of the Desert Museum back in the late 70s. And it was always exciting to see the characters, the amazing scientists, young scientists that Richard was mentoring. I mean, people, thinkers out on the tail of the bell curve, people like Kim Clifton, who was, Richard mentored him studying egg predators on the coast, the Mexican coast of the Pacific, where the sea turtles were breeding. And people like Dennis Cornejo, some of you might be here, I haven't seen you yet, who was studying spadefoot toads out at night in the ponds in the desert. And so here's this panoply of amazing people that Richard was mentoring and bringing together. And people like Gary Nabhan, oh gosh, what a mind. And so I would say that Richard was not only the most frustrating and enigmatic and rasty and generous and all-encompassing interdisciplinarian that I've ever known. He brought people together also from other walks of life. When we first started the Desert Museum's Harvest Bazaar, he brought the docents of the Desert Museum together with volunteers at the Autumn Nation at Santa Vera. And Clifford Pablo, who became a lifelong friend of Richard's, and brought them all to the Environmental Research Lab, which we used to be at the airport in Tucson, to to do the first mesquite milling, to engender the action of the native people at Santa Vera and the Desert Museum outreach program. So it was the first batch of mesquite pods that were getting industrial. I wonder if any of you have ever had a compliment from Richard. Oh, I see one hand, two hands, three. I'll share one little incident. A few years ago, we had a party, a potluck at my house in Tucson, and I had grown Pisidium mollis from the Rio Cuchahaki, the Alamos area, and I had grown it from seed, and I had it in the backyard. It was like 15 feet high, a beautiful tree, really from the tropical desert. Anyway, or the edge of the desert. And Richard wanted, first of all, at the potluck, not food, but he wanted to have a field trip of the yard. So he went back in the backyard, and he saw this huge tree, and he said, "That can't grow here." So I had to take that as a compliment.
We need a little taste of Richard's creativity. Carlos, would you join us? El otro Carlitos.
Yeah, that's what Richard used to call me. So I am one of the many Mexican young biologists, then young, long time ago. Not young now, of course, that Richard mentored. He was a force of nature. He was un biólogo de la frontera. He really mentored a bunch of us. So when I was thinking about where to move, I talked with Alberto Burques, another one of the Felger's mentees, and he told me, Richard lives in Silver City. Move to Silver City. So we came in January of 2020 to visit the place, and I told my son Cormac, you're on a pilgrimage. And he said, pilgrimage for what? And I told him, well, it's a pilgrimage to really meet the desert beat. And he said, what the hell are you talking about that? And that is because Richard was not only a botanist, he was a poet. And I've been trying to translate his damn poetry into Spanish, and it's an impossible task because I cannot capture the musicality of his work. It's fantastic, so I will read you just one of them, and I will just shut up with that. It's one that touches me particularly, and so I'll try to, like silk, stay dry. It's called Flash Flood. Life flows continue, now and then streams end, some in resplendent swirls. Sorry about the Mexican accent. Others swerve into vacant channels, suddenly flashing flood debris and muck, sucking energy from the dancing waters. The human flash flood, wave crest, crashes onto floodplain rocks, fresh wet earth for sunflowers and slime molds.
I'm going to begin looking for people who want to volunteer who I might not have spoken to or are thinking about saying something. Just a warning.
This goes back to 1970. I had just received the contract to write a book on Native American food. Now, interest in Native Americans waxes and wanes, and in 1970 it was high, and somebody in New York decided they wanted one. Well, after a little research, I realized that if you go back just a little ways, Native American food was edible wild plants, about which I knew nothing. I had studied zoology in college. So I was living in an artist colony in Oracle. Somebody brought Richard up, and back in 1970, he took me on my very first edible wild plant walk. And so he became my very first mentor. And then as the years went on, when I had questions, I would often call him, and sometimes he would give me the answer, and sometimes he would just say, read Felger, Edible Botany, Volume 6. But eventually I was able to partially return the favor. When Muffin talked about when we began interest in mesquite and grinding mesquite, and Richard would go off into international conferences extolling mesquite, and then he also often asked me to make these little mesquite crackers that I made. So I would bake up 3 or 4 dozen these little mesquite crackers and put them in a box with a doily and send him off into Italy or wherever talking about mesquite. And so that sort of thing happened a number of times over the year. But the most recent one was a few years ago, and I live in Tucson, and he called and said, well, we're working with these little dates, and I want to know if you can fix up anything with these little dates. And so I said, okay. The next day, on my front porch, were 10 pounds of these little bitty dry nothing. There was nothing but a seed and skin. I mean, really, there was nothing you could really make of it. So I wasn't about to do this myself, so I called Muffin and I said, will you take half of these things and see what you can do with them? So I managed to come up with, I boiled them up and made sort of a syrup. That was just about all you could do with them, and then I used the syrup to make a muffin. And I can't remember, Muffin, what did you do? You did something with them as well. But so that was the most recent, and then also, unfortunately, the last interaction that we had. Thank you.
Peggy Hutchinson. She could hear me from here. Hitchcock. Peggy Hitchcock. Excuse me.
Wow, this is an amazing group of people. I feel so honored to be here. It's like, yeah, it's really great. I just wish Richard could be here with us. And I think he would really enjoy the day. And, perhaps he is. I am sure he is with us. I moved here, I got very claustrophobic. I was living most of my life in New York City, and I moved from New York City to a tent in the Chiricahuas. And that didn't work for various reasons. And it was a big change. But I was very happy. And then my then husband wanted to start a publishing business, which of course he knew nothing about, because he'd run a newspaper, he ran something called the East Village Other, which has nothing to do with book publishing. Never mind. So off we moved. We had to move to Tucson. This was before desktop publishing, right? I don't remember exactly how I met Richard, but I remember he was there in my life on a very, very continuous basis. He was living in Bird Canyon at the time, and he would come by because he loved to swim, and we would talk, and then he introduced me to the desert, and he would he bought me some really beautiful plants about which I knew nothing, and then he guided me to buy other plants, which I ended up with a really beautiful selection of amazing trees and blue palms and Chilean wine palms, I mean, you name it. And then I had to leave because it was too much. I couldn't deal with all that. But it was wonderful. And at one point, he was just we were very close friends. And my son was traumatized by his father trying to teach him the multiplication tables, which of course he never knew himself. And he was he would shout at my son, and of course poor Wolf was like, he was about to fail the 3rd grade because he couldn't do his math. So Richard stepped up and he said, well, I can come over, I can tutor him. I'll teach him the multiplication tables. So for about, 1 or 2 months, 5 days a week, Richard would come over and work with my son and tutor him And guess what? He didn't fail third grade. So, you know, he has been a dear, dear friend of my family and my children, and so much a part of our life. And my sadness is that in the last few years, he's been here, and I know he was focused on his work. And whether he had a premonition of dying, I don't know, but I'm so happy that he was able to finish his work that he had been working on for 20 years. And I think he died feeling very peaceful and happy with his life. But for us, of course, we miss him terribly. And I think we've all been blessed to have known such a unique and wonderful person. And for me, he really opened my eyes to so much in the world that I knew nothing about. And I just feel very blessed to have known him, as I'm sure everybody here feels the same way. One thing I need to do, I need to read something from my daughter, who lives in Hawaii. They have an agroforestry project, and her husband is an ethnobotanist, and he kept talking, when they met, he kept talking about mesquite. And I said, you know, I have a friend who's really into mesquite. I think you should meet. Anyway, my daughter came back from business school. Richard had flown to Hawaii, and the two of them were sitting side by side on the computers. Hi, Sophia. Anyway, it was wonderful for him because he didn't have the academic training that Richard did, and he mentored him and gave him the assurance that he was really on the right track. He was going to write a chapter for his book, and Richard said, you know, I think you've got to write your own book. So, I mean, he's been just such a wonderful friend. My daughter wrote this. Richard, or Uncle Richard, as I should have called him, was a dear friend to me and my whole family. He was a mentor to me in many things, but mostly botanical. His love of the natural world and the people who still remember that they are part of it led to his life's work of research and writing, so that our connection and responsibility to all living things, big and small, animate and inanimate, will never be forgotten. Thank you, Uncle Richard, for helping me to remember. May we meet again. Your niece, Sophia. And then this is from Neil, my son-in-law, who is an ethnobotanist. Where did you go? You slipped out, went for the long hike, an eternal walk in beauty in the flowery world. See you soon. Peace and prosopis, Neil. Dugan, where are you?
One of the things that I appreciated most about Richard was those dips he brought to the potlucks. The dips. There was always a really lot of it. And it was usually really tasty and very healthy, and it was always different each time. It's kind of a metaphor for Richard. Richard was kind of ruthless sometimes. I came to Silver City, I knew Zilka, but I didn't know Richard. And within a very short period of time, he had kind of worked me into his plans. And for 2 years, we raced all over Grant County and down into Arizona, up to northern New Mexico, searching out edible plants that could be adapted to agriculture. So a lot of time in the car with Richard. He was a big, heavy beast. And a lot of memories in the field. The field was kind of like the beans or the tomatoes of the dip. It was just rock solid. So we do the field work. And one of my memories, for so many, is that he could outpace me. He was older than I was, and I thought I was in pretty good shape, but I can remember being down by Lake Evans there working our way up a long canyon, and it was really, really hot and still. And Richard, I was like kind of the bloodhound looking for the plants, but he was steady, and I kind of got heat stroke way up in this canyon, and he was nursing me along, and him helping me, and I'm trying to keep up with him and sitting down. He finally had to bring me back down the canyon. I just couldn't keep up with Richard. This happened many times in the field. So we get back in the car, and this was kind of the diversity part of these wonderful tips he would bring. Because as has been pointed out, Richard was a poet, he was a raconteur, he was a teacher, pattern recognition. I remember him teaching me that, the 60-mile-an-hour stop here, scanning all the time. But I was just looking at one of his poems back there. I hadn't read none of his poems. And they sound just like our conversations in the truck, and we're out looking for fields. There's this broad diversity. So, kind of like with his dips, you know, one would be a salsa-based, one would be all beans, one would be the guacamole. But you never knew where the spicy was going to take you. And there'd be a little bit of everything. Big old thing. Richard's kind of had a wicked sense of humor with me. We loved each other's company. And I think that's the most thing I can say about Richard. I wasn't the scientist at the level he was. I said, you're inveigling me into this, Richard. I'm really a tree crop man. No, you're perfect for the job. I spent a lot of time working out the strands and doing this up at his house. And the dip would come out and we'd have the dip. But the diversity of Richard, I remember when we were up there, and he had all these magazines, stacks and stacks of magazine in his bitten, as he called it, which was his office. And he had New Yorkers, and he had The Sun. These were his subscription ones. And he had The New Scientist, and he had the Smithsonian's in there a little bit. And I said, whoa, I really like those New Yorkers, you know, when you're done with them. Ever after, every week or month, there would be a big paper bag with New Yorkers, The Sun, The New Scientist, and the Smithsonian's on my front porch. This was just his junk reading. I mean, this was between breaks because you all know how busy he was. So one of the last memories I have of Richard is, again, I told him I was a tree crop man. This was already mentioned about the trees. And, you know, he was always giving me a hard time because I knew common names, etc. And I always, you know, I only know tree crops. I don't even know natives that were production trees. And he would always be testing me on the trees. Well, you're tree guy, you know, what's that? Oh, I don't know the natives. Okay. So then, one day he came up to me and he said, there are only I think he said 62, someone can correct me. There's only 62 species of trees in the Gila, and I'm writing a book about it, and there's no excuse that you should know every single one of them. It's not that many. And lastly, what I think about Richard is when you have all that dip, generous amount, tasty, diverse, different each week, is you share that. So I have the image of us all sitting around having this dip together. He was shared, he's very generous, as you said. And in that middle picture, always I see Zilka is sharing in the dip. And that's my final point, is that Richard seemed to me a man much in love. He was already been in love with his work. And he seemed to have such a deep respect and love for Zilka, and she for him, that I always thought, man, Richard, he's a happy guy, and he's a very lucky guy. So are we, who've known him.
Gary, I think you said you had something else to say.
As a half dozen of us have already hinted, to be in the desert with Richard was like going to a different planet with Morris Sendak, Gary Larson, Dr. Seuss, or you name it. But it was really opening up another world because everything there were familiars. What I'm saying is that in some places you could go out with him and he would say there's 120 plant families here, but they were one family, just as they are with all of us. We are one family through Richard. And he knew the plants like they were little brothers and sisters. And it was such a wonderful way to get to know the world and to steer us, some of us very wayward and scattered, into concentrating and focusing on these things right at our feet. My first time with Richard in the field was supposed to be a 10-day trip into the Sierra del Rosario that Ben wrote about. And I thought that I'd just arrive at his door and we'd take off. It was 2 days later after we took off for the trip, and I was camping on his doorstep while we got balloon tires for the car, while we got groceries, while we set up 15 different plant presses that were on top of the car. And then we got in there, and I found out that while Kim Clifton and I were running for the tires and the water and the gasoline and all of that, Richard was in charge of food, and what we had as a food for the field trip was rye crisps, Dundee marmalade, caviar, and, oh yes, the most important thing, Alice B. Toklas brownies. That meant that if we found a plant species that he had not had on his list for the Pinacati and the Sierra del Rosario, that Kim and I would get a brownie for dinner that would last us on till morning. And somehow we stayed out there longer and longer. 10 days meant nothing. I was supposed to be back for my first job with the Park Service after 10 days, and the trip went on for 15 days, and I just thought it was going to last forever. And then one morning he woke up and he said, "We have to go, we have to go." Like he'd gotten a message that there was an emergency someplace. And we said, "Richard, what's wrong?" And he said, "We're out of caviar, and we're out of Dundee marmalade, and there's bruchid beetles in the rye crisps. Let's get the hell out of here." And it was like hunter-gatherers any place. You're going along, you're going on, and then someone says, "Let's go someplace else." And we took off. So we got back 14, 15 days after we took off, 5 days after I was supposed to start a job with the federal government. And when I looked and said, "Richard, I don't know what I'm going to do if they're going to accept me. I'm 4 days late for my first job with these guys." And he said, "Just tell them that you were having so much fun, you lost track of time." I don't know if he'd ever worked for the government. But he had this wicked sense of humor that I think we all know. That one time that our good friend Don Fox and his co-founder of the Center for Plant Conservation out to see Richard. And the guy said, "Well, so Richard, I know you know more about the desert. Just tell us what plants should be on the endangered species list for the desert." And Richard said, "That's a really stupid question because the trouble is we don't know really the range in the Mexico. So if I just tell you what's in rare in the US, it doesn't matter because we haven't done the adequate exploration." And the guy said, "Oh, that's okay. This isn't Don Falk, it's a colleague of his. We have a logarithm for that." He said, "A logarithm for that? Where are you from?" And the guy said, "Harvard. We have a logarithm for everything at Harvard." And Richard said, I just have one question for you. How do you deal with that monotonous, insipid green back where you live?" End of conversation. My last thing is another great thing that Richard said that I've thought about a million times when I was talking to Carlos Martinez. He one time just stopped in the middle of something else we were doing and he said, "I've never understood why humans made such a big mistake during their evolution." I said, "What's that, Richard?" And he said, "Why in the hell Would anyone ever want to live in a frost-free area where you can't grow orchids outside, you don't have the most delicious fruit in the world, and you have to wear clothes? And I believe that this is still the major issue that archaeologists and anthropologists have to deal with, you know. Why are we here? And Richard always asks those big questions, and that's what we love him for. Thank you.
Michael, would you like to say something?
Tuesday hikes. About 4 years ago, very short, brief time that I knew Richard, but on these hikes there was a man who would often take off his sandals and start going barefoot on the paths. And Richard, with all his knowledge and interest in the plants and mentoring people in botany and stuff, took notice of this guy who would go around in bare feet on these stony paths, and he paid attention to that, and he remarked to the fellow about it and asked a couple of questions, and I was moved by this, and so Richard, I'm going to give away a secret now, but it's time, I think, that, you know, all this knowledge of this ethnobotany and all the data he had and the books he wrote and all of that, Richard got to be, for all of his life, a boy. So stopping the car at 60 miles an hour because he saw something, or looking into a pool and seeing something else, and going digging and growing grasses. I mean, grasses, the most common things around. I think that was his secret. He got to live as a boy. Thank you, Richard.
Rod?
I was lucky enough to know Richard for over 30 years, and I wanted to give a little bit of a different perspective on Richard, because we first met in the late 80s, and when my first wife, my late wife, Nancy Zierenberg, who many of you may have known, was a botanist and person that was very involved in the Native Plant Society. But Richard was on the first board of directors. I was on we started an organization which is still extant. It's still working in southern Nevada and all this whole area, called the Sky Island Alliance. And Richard was on the board of directors with me in the original development of that organization. And I don't know how many of you have ever served on a board of directors with Richard, but it was always exciting. Because we would sit down, and Richard had a very different perspective. I came from very much an activist background, an environmental activist background, and Richard had a very different perspective on activism, which was not always rooted in what might be possible politically and socially. And we would talk about things like, well, we need to do this, we need to do that, and Richard would say, why should we just protect Saguaro National Park? Why should we just protect rare plants and species? We need to protect miles upon miles of the ironwood forest country, and miles upon miles of this. And we would all go, it's a great idea, Richard. Do you have any ideas on how we might go forward in this? And he would just say, we'll do it. We can do it. We'll figure out a way. And, you know, so it was always fun. So I wanted to and just say that, you know, he also had that, and it was always supportive, always In all those years since then, every time I ran into Richard at various things, he would always bring up Sky Island Alliance and say, how is it going? You know, how are things moving over there? And, you know, and so he always had that, you know, that belief that we had the ability, all of us had the ability to move the world if we just put our mind to it and we just put our energy into it. And I really believe that, and I think Richard believed that. And so that's my closing argument with Richard. And many thanks.
Judith, would you say something?
I'm so shy. Anyway, I was a teacher for 20 years and you can't be shy, right? Okay, I am doubly blessed here. Number one, I have Deming Gustafson as my husband. Blush. And number two, I inherited all of you, part of his life. And my funniest memory of Dr. Felger was we had gone down to the ranch that everybody gets stuck in, and Charles tried to go down there in his Lincoln Continental, and all the botanists were there, and it was the Sunday, once a month, hike, and 3 botanists, one of them was him, I think the second one was Jack, and I wasn't sure who the third one, because I was the new kid on the block. But anyway, they started raising their voices. They disagreed on a Latin name for a plant. And they threw their backpacks off and got down and yelled at each other and was holding this, no, it's this, no, it's a superior, no, it's inferior. And I've remembered that ever since because it is the fight of the botanists. Thank you.
Just 2 more, I think. Someone give me a nod over there. It looks like you're starting to get ready for food. Okay, so 2 more. Jody Lee, please. And let me say that we have a meal being served, but we can stay as long as we like in this park. We've got the mic. We can all reconvene here. Zilka is nodding at me. We've talked about this. So that any of you who have not been able to share your thoughts would be welcome to either during or after the meal. We can have open mic during the meal as well. But
Well, I've enjoyed hearing everyone's story so much. And I just had to tell, well, first of all, I have to say that I did get a compliment once from Richard when I was staying at his home at the behest of Paul Martin, who didn't want me living up on Tumamock Hill anymore. So I stayed at Richard's and I fixed a breakfast that he approved of, and I can't for the life of me remember what it was. But anyway, I had been down in Desemboque, staying with Juanita, learning some of her plant and animal things that she did, learning some of her concoctions. And it was difficult because she didn't know many of the same words for plants that I knew. And so I was trying to learn the Spanish and she was trying to learn the Spanish, and we often didn't communicate, but I would sometimes bring things back to the States to learn what they were. And one day I was down there minding my own business, standing with a group of women talking about plants, and this village dog came running up out of nowhere. And of course I was wearing a long skirt like I am now, because women in Desemboque in the 70s didn't wear anything except long skirts. And this dog came running up going, arf, 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 and grabbed me on the back of the leg. and wouldn't let go. And it took 2 people to pry this dog off of me, and then it went ruff, 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 and ran off into the desert. So you make the worst possible assumption, right? Now, I didn't have a car. People were coming back for me, so I figured I had 10 days to figure out what to do about this dog. But in the meantime, that same day, the leg started swelling. It got bright red. It was hot. It was painful. And I was living with Angelita, the herb woman. And so she touched it and felt it, and she brought out some things and heated them in water and made a poultice and put it on. And the next day it was so much better. Well, I asked for a little bit of this because she and I couldn't communicate what it was. So I asked for a little bit to bring back to show to, Richard Felger. Because he would know what it was. I knew he would know what it was. And so I kept it very carefully, and sure enough, in a week, the people who were coming to get me came and got me. And my leg was so much better. And there were a lot of other things. There was a laying on of hands ceremony for me. There were all kinds of amazing things that happened during that week. But I got back to the States. I started the rabies shots anyway. But within a few days, I managed to go and see Richard. And I took him this little baggie I had of this. And he glanced at it, and he looked at me and he said, "You know what this is." Now it's like, crumbled leaves that are desert colored. And I said, "I don't know." And he said, "Taste it." And I said, "It's creosote?" It was just dried creosote leaves. And it had done wonders. Thank you.
Rob Winston, would you like to say something?
Thank you. All the stories have been wonderful. Richard and I have been buddies for probably 15 years, neighbors. Our wives became close friends. And we got together a lot. And I understand the reason, I think, why he hooked on to me, because at some party, I met Richard. He was a botanist, and I said, and then part of the Native Plant Society. And I said, well, I make my living on native plants. I'm a woodworker, I like mesquite. I make things out of mesquite. And that, I think, was the nugget of respect that carried through our lives for the next 15 years. And when I built a greenhouse on my house, Richard said, "Can I have one of those too?" And I said, "Yeah, okay." And so I built him one just like mine too. Generosity rewards generosity. I really appreciate that, learned that from Richard. Thank you all.
Oops. Lori, I think you're being pointed at by someone else. Otherwise, I'm going to... Lori Monty.
A short story about setting the table, since we're about to eat. So I also have been working with the Seri Indians all of these years, and thanks to people of the desert and Seri Ethnobotany, I have been able to, I came here 20 years ago. I'm a nurse, practitioner, public health person, foremost learning ethnobotany, and was asked to set up a diabetes prevention program and then fast forward, set up COVID first response clinics in the community. And if it hadn't been for that book, I didn't, Richard Felger, I met him eventually, but I met Becky Moser first. And I've had the opportunity to tell Richard thank you so much for that book, and Becky as well, and Kathy, who's here, and Steve, because that book guided me in what has turned out to be a program to support the herbalists themselves, who have provided that ethnobotany knowledge for the book in their practice in the communities, delivering healthcare to the community members. And so I did have the opportunity to thank Richard and see how grateful he was for people like myself and others that take this knowledge and run with it and apply it and give it back to the community. And I appreciate that sentiment from him, that's part of why he writes these books for others to take and use. And it's like he set the table, and he and Becky Moser in my particular life, because I didn't have to start from scratch whatsoever. So.
I'm going to close us down with a verse that came to me 2 days after Richard moved on to his next big fieldwork project. It's called Pax et Prosopis, peas and mesquites, one of Richard's favorite phrases. My gardens grow rich because of Richard. He told me not to buy an old house. When I did, he said, fit the crop to the land. Plant natives that match soils and climate. Draw in the local pollinators. He knew my husband's family. In the 50s, he bought paintings and drawings from my mother-in-law, preserved an entire sketchbook, her Southwest images fit for framing. I should tell you, I'm only going to read excerpts from this, it's long. He potlucked with our gang of usual suspects, celebrated birthdays of people and books, dogs, emus, horses, chickens presided, greenhouse tours followed by food, fitting seasons for giving thanks. Walking with Richard was a pleasure. Driving? He noted every plant through the windshield, each with known character. No matter which season he passed through, whatever terrain he traversed, he fit worldwide. He never stopped teaching. We remember his quips and comments, repeated over and over until we'd say, Richard, we've heard that before. Now, how fitting his phrases still echo. If I'd had more time, the essay would be shorter. How many species have you eaten today? Me, 27. Better done than perfect, though perfect was the aim. It's not what you get into a chapter, it's what they don't take out. And my fave, hedge your bets with intercropping. He sent relentless queries before dawn. Writing was important, finishing paramount. Landmark science to beat poetry. He began what now passes to next generations, fitting mentorship into posterity. Richard believed in past become present. Ancients had fun too, he would say, finding kindred joy with place, plants, critters, and more. He was a time traveler, fitting in one name only to forget another. Like ecotones in succession, like seasons cycling round, like his perennial no-till desert crops, Richard's remarkable work flows on. Fit the crop to the land. Mark the man and his legacy. Thank you.
So what a wonderful, wonderful tribute. Thank you all so much. Up here and around. You're going to come through here, over by Wendy. Wendy's got.
Richard, turn around for a second. So So I can get a shot of you with the canyon in the background.
I don't get his balance.
When you have a
There he
chance.
is doing a photo.